Are you suggesting that someone's trying to make a real-life sequel?
Stab 2? Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.
No, wow. Come on, man.
Oh, please. By definition alone, they're inferior films.
Bullshit generalization. Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Oh, yeah?
Name one.
I'll be back.
Freedom, you're my older brother, and I love you. But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family you live. Never.
I just can't believe you came here and did it again. You guys give up, or you're thirsty for more?
Welcome in to Season 4, Episode 11 of Duel of the Greats. Now, I know that I came in a little sarcastic in my hosting duties last week when we analyzed the Hellraiser films, and, certainly the audience really was craving for those, but tonight, we really do have one that people are very, very excited about. In fact, I think when we were talking about this initial season, this is one of the very first ones that came to all our minds. And when we spoke to other people, a lot of people said that this is one that we definitely had to do. So tonight, we will be comparing the OG classic Alien from director Ridley Scott, and then the equally as classic sequel from James Cameron, Aliens. So that there's no confusion there. So very exciting. I will start. These are just such classic films. We've actually talked about Alien before on our podcast in our very first season. We compared it to the film Jaws. But in case you have not listened to that episode,
Our second episode ever, if I'm not mistaken.
It was our second episode ever. So in case you are new to the podcast, and if you don't know already, you can hit us up on any of the socials. We are pretty much Duel of the Greats everywhere. You can email us, duelofthegreats@gmail.com, except on TikTok, we are at Duel Podcast. But if you're not familiar with some of our earlier work, you may not know some of our experiences with these films. I'm curious, just real quick before we jump in, when did you guys first watch these movies? And I'll start with I guess Jeff, you're defending Alien tonight, so I'll start with you of when you first watched these movies.
So I actually got, surprisingly, given how much I love them, the movies and the Alien franchise, I got a late start on it. So I want to say, I actually, the first Alien movie that I saw was Prometheus, if you can believe that. And I loved it. And so I was like, oh, this is part of the Alien universe. I always knew about Alien. And I remember I begged my parents for some of the Alien action figures. I just thought the Xenomorphs looked cool, because they do. But yeah, so when was Prometheus? 2012? I would have been, excuse me, 27. And then saw Prometheus, and I was like, I guess I should watch
I want to
Alien.
clarify. You were begging your parents for the Xenomorph action figures before you'd seen any of the films?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So you weren't begging your parents at the age of 27 for the I just wanted to clarify that. It's like,
No,
I think you can just go out and buy one on your
Yeah.
own, man. So before you'd seen any of the films, you wanted the action figure. Okay, interesting. All right, just clarifying that.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, just because they looked cool. Because I hadn't seen the movie, so I didn't know. Especially because when they came out with the really cool looking action figures, it was Alien Resurrection, because that was when they went crazy with all the different Xenos, where they had the ones swimming underwater, they had the Xeno dogs, the whole deal. And so those were the really cool looking ones. And that was 97, so I would have been 10, 12, right in the I would have been 12, but that would have been, right in that range. Anyway, so I see Prometheus in 2012. I was like, I really liked that. I should probably watch the original. So I watched the original, and I remember just being like, holy shit, how have I waited this long into my life to watch this movie? It was awesome, and I was like, well, I guess I should watch the sequel now. And then I watched the sequel, Aliens, loved it. And yeah, then a couple of years later, Alien Covenant came out, and then eventually at one point, Steve, you came over and we watched Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection together. I think those were two different times, but um, so yeah, I think I've seen, if I'm not mistaken, every movie in the Alien universe. And if we know there's an Alien and Predator crossover in terms of the universe, I've seen all the Alien, all the Predator, and the Alien vs Predator movies. Um, and then even if you want to do the cheeky Blade Runner crossover as well, I've seen all the Blade Runner movies. So I'm familiar with this. But that was so yeah, around 2012ish was my first introduction as an adult. Fell in love. I've loved it ever since. One of my favorite franchises.
Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome franchise. Probably one of the best, if we're really comparing franchises to franchises. Like you, I was kind of a latecomer as well. I don't think I watched the first one until after you got me kind of into it, probably about a decade ago now. And then similar deal. Just kind of watched them all after that, and can't get enough of it. So I just bought the new Alien first-person shooter on PlayStation 5. I've not played it yet, but I'm pretty
excited. I was about to say, we play all the games too. Steve and I have played a bunch of them.
Yeah.
I have that game on VR, so I know what you're talking about. But yes, love the franchise. What about you, Nate?
I will specifically shout out. I think I saw Alien and Aliens when I was in college, and then I didn't see any of the others for a long time. In fact, I will admit, I think I said this at the time. Another episode where we watched Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Those were definitely the first two times I had seen those films. But I will shout out that when I worked, my longtime listeners may know, I think I've mentioned this on the pod, that I used to work at Disney World, and I worked at a ride called the Great Movie Ride that is no longer there. But one of the movies that you went through was Alien. And the alien would come down and attack you in your little vehicle. It would come down, had these lights and stuff, and these big smoke machines that would come down. And then there was a side alien that would come out from the side. So I always had kind of a sort of a special connection with Alien, just because that was one of the films that you would go through on the Great Movie Ride. It was kind of, honestly, for like a Disney ride, a slow ride, it's kind of like a scary moment. It's sort of been a slow ride for a Disney ride. So
I did not know that about you, that you worked at Disney World.
And I've definitely never mentioned it on the pod. So there, our listeners just learned something. So yeah, Great Movie Ride. That was one of the movies that you go through if you ever went on that. At that point, you went
Disney
on it.
Didn't even own them at that point.
No, if you went on it as a guest, you were either with a bandit or a gangster. The tour guide, which is what I was, they go off the vehicle. They're actually not with the guests when they go through Aliens. So the only time I would go through Alien is when I was on something called a dead show, where basically there were no guests on the vehicle. So sometimes it just wouldn't be very crowded, or there wouldn't be enough people, and we would just run a vehicle through, because it's on a track, so you got to keep it moving. And we would run a vehicle on the track, and you'd go through the alien scene by yourself, just in this vehicle, completely alone, and it could be, I mean,
you were Ridley.
A little creepy. I was. It could be. In fact, they had a. And again, fans of this ride will remember there was a Sigourney Weaver animatronic, and she was kind of in a tunnel. She had a gun, and she was sort of looking off to one side. And when you were in the pre-show. She didn't. She didn't speak. That was Disney didn't push it that far. But in the pre-show, in the line, you would see the trailers for all of the movies that you were going to travel through. And so one of the trailers that was on a loop in that pre-show was the original trailer for the very first Alien, which was, if you've ever seen the original trailer for the very first Alien, one of the greatest movie trailers ever made. A really, really creepy, effective trailer.
You're talking about the teaser or the trailer?
It's like a teaser, yeah.
Where it just like pans down to the egg?
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
it's got
yeah, that's good stuff.
it also used the "In space, no one can hear you scream," one of the
Yep.
great taglines of all time. But with that said, I don't want to burn a lot of content because this is going to be kind of like a Godfather 2 situation. I think we all love both these movies, but we have to decide tonight which one is
One of
better.
them's got to win.
And someone's got to win. And after that, as we've shown throughout this season, no one ever talks about it after we have made the decision. So I think we probably need to just, we need to silence everybody. So with that said, we're going to do Alien versus Aliens. And I think, as I already stated, Jeff will be taking the original Alien. So I will pass it off to him for his points about the movie Alien.
All right. First point on why Alien is better than Alien. So, as I sat down to do this and figure out my argument, this is really hard because both these movies are so effing good that it's like any strength they has, it's also a strength of the other one. And so it's really hard to try and find 3 points. But I found 3 that I think are good. Number 1, and this is probably this would probably persuade my opposing counsel more than the judge itself. But first reason Alien is better is Jonesy, the cat. Jonesy was in Aliens briefly, but when Ripley left to go to the second site, the Jonesy was left on Earth. But in the first movie, Jonesy plays a very pivotal role. Not only is he a crew member of the Nostromo, but he basically, I mean, he's one of the reasons for how good the ending is. Ripley has to make sure she grabs Jonesy, and he has like sometimes with you think movie magic. I mean, this is 1979, right? So it's not like back in the not like now where you can just CGI like what was the cat in Captain Marvel. Shit, I can't remember. It looks like Jonesy. What?
I don't remember its name.
Yeah, the Flurkin. But
it's
I
not a
can't
cat.
remember. But I can't remember what its name was. Anyway, you can just CGI all that stuff, and it doesn't even matter. It's just easy. But back in the day, they couldn't do that. So how do you? You can't really train cats. I mean, you can if you're like a dedicated cat trainer, but it's really difficult. And so the fact that they can get this cat to do everything that they could in the movie is pretty amazing. And I'm pretty sure Sigourney Weaver had a pretty good like if you just type in Sigourney Weaver or Jonesy, there's all kinds of pictures, not just from the movie and her, but like on the set, of she just holding him. So I think they had a pretty good relationship. And he is one of, if not the most famous movie animals in movie history. And even though he does make a cameo in the second one, he really shines in the first one. And I mean, I don't want to make a bold claim and say that he's like one of the really first like really prominent movie animals like that, but it one of the, in modern times, definitely one of the first and the greatest. So that is reason number 1 why Alien is better.
Yeah, Jonesy's pretty compelling. I'll give you that. I have a Jonesy T-shirt. But as you pointed out yourself, he's in the second one as well.
Just a cameo.
It counts.
All right. Second point for why Alien is better is the xenomorph itself. And I truly do mean itself, because the main difference between the first 2 movies that we have is, Steve, you mentioned this last week. Some of this might boil down to preference because of what type of movie you like, but ultimately the one of the main differences between the 2 movies is Alien is definitely much more of a horror movie, and Aliens is definitely much more of an action movie. Both have elements of the other. There's some action in Alien, and there's some horror elements in Aliens, but those are the sort of genres that the two fit in more. And part of that is in Alien, there's only the one xenomorph on board, and that's hunting down the crewmate of a smaller crew. And then in Aliens, there's a bigger crew, and then they find the hive. There's lots of xenos. There's the queen. They're everywhere. So in Aliens, having so many of the xenomorphs, seeing so many of them on screen, I think it sort of cheapens it a little bit. It lessens the impact of the xenomorph itself. And when we talked about this way back in season one, you know, we talked about how Alien came to be, and essentially the pitch to the studio when making Alien was it's Jaws in space. And when you look at one of the brilliant aspects of Jaws is how they just don't show the shark basically until the final 30 minutes of the movie. And with Alien, you have a little bit of that as well. You really don't see the Xeno that much. You see it in kind of fleeting glimpses. It's dark black all over. The ship is dark. The lighting is poor. You know, you see its skin has almost got this sort of like metallic sheen to it, and so you see these reflections as it moves, and you see sort of close-ups of its face and stuff. So you see little bits of it, but you never get the full picture. Not until the very end, when Ripley is facing it in the escape pod, and it really ups the tension. It really ups the impact of seeing the xenomorph itself, and really sort of solidifies it as one of the greatest movie monsters in history. And even though I think Aliens accomplishes what it wants to by having so many of the xenomorphs, I think it sort of ruins I shouldn't say ruins, but it definitely lessens the impact that the creature itself has, because there's so many of them, and they've all got guns. They're blasting away at them, and you know, it just becomes a sort of like, oh, it's just a thing. It's just another xenomorph they've got to kill, they've got to fight. And then, oh, there's a bigger one. It's the queen. And it is cool. It is cool to see the queen and the impact that has. But they have to up the ante like that because of how they have so many of them now. Whereas I think the strength of Alien, of having just the one xenomorph, I think really puts that movie, it just sort of perfectly encapsulates how that movie succeeds on the different levels that it does. And I think you lose just a little bit of that when you have so many more of them in the second one.
I think it all comes down to personal taste, and especially as we've talked about on this season, when you get two movies that are so good going up against each other, it really is going to come down to what you prefer. But one interesting thing that I noticed rewatching these, side note, I find myself rewatching these movies far differently when we're doing them for a season like this, where you're literally looking to find nuggets to put up against, a different movie, versus just watching them to take them in and talk about them later. So it is kind of an interesting experience to go back and do it in this way, to find ammunition, so to speak. But anyway, so as I was doing that for this movie, I realized about an hour and 20 minutes in, an hour and 15 minutes in, we still hadn't seen a single alien in Aliens. So it's doing the slow burn kind of horror thing like Jaws as well. It's just that everything does blow up crazy at the end, and you get, like you're saying, tons more on screen. But it's not like a Starship Troopers or some other action movie with aliens where it's just you open and you're right in the thick of it, and it's combat and we're fighting. And I thought that was it's something I never really noticed watching it just like this, is the slow burn. The tension is there in Aliens as well. It just, once the action starts, it takes it even higher than Alien. So I think, obviously, to a certain extent, what you're saying is irrefutable, but I think you have to give Aliens more credit for using the withholding of the horror and making that the terrifying part than just, writing it off and saying it's pure combat.
That's a fair point. I never really had looked to see how far into the movie for Aliens that it was. That's interesting. That's good to know. And I think, in fairness, I think one of the issues that Aliens has to deal with is because you assume people have seen Alien, they know what the xenomorph looks like. So you have to do something else. And so that's kind of where they go. That's interesting. So for my final point, though, I think with the final point, one of the sort of constants of the Alien franchise has become the synthetic that's aboard the ship or part of the crew. And Ash in the first one, I think, is a much better synthetic character, and I won't say better villain because Bishop's not really a villain, but just as a villain, or Ash is also a villain in the end, but it's as a synthetic, I think Ash is a better character. It's more interesting, especially because we don't know from the start that he's a synthetic. Let me back up for a sec. First of all, I just think that beside anything like outside of the actual plot points of the film, I think Ian Holm gives a better performance than Lance Henriksen does, and I love Lance Henriksen. So, I still think he gives a good performance as Bishop, of course. But I think when you think of synthetics in the Alien universe, and especially in terms of like iconic, I think Ash is more the one that people think of over Bishop. Case in point, Alien Romulus that was released last year, they used special effects. Ian Holm has passed away, and they used special effects to sort of recreate him as another version of Ash in that movie. Lance Henriksen's still alive. They could have gotten him to play another version of Bishop had they wanted to, but they chose Ash instead. So I think that sort of gives credence to my point. But I also think, especially on repeated viewings, and every time I rewatch Alien, which is a lot, a few times a year, but every time I rewatch Alien, I feel like I notice something new each time that Ash does that gives you a clue before you know that he's an android, a synthetic, that he's that lets you know he's evil before you see the twist, right? There's the way he's sort of, when they're first analyzing Kane, when he comes in with the face hugger and they're asking questions and he's sort of standoffish and sort of weird, and it's kind of like, okay, maybe he's just an asshole scientist or something. And then now once you've learned the twist, then you realize, no, it's because he's trying to play it coy, but they want this. That's the whole reason they're here. And then when they go into after the face hugger comes off and they go into the med bay and they're trying to find it, when Ripley and Dallas come in, they leave the door open. And Ash goes over. It's not something that they don't like cut to this scene. They just kind of show it in the background. But you see Ash go over and he closes the door to the lab. And on first viewing, you're like, oh, he's just practicing good safety protocols. But then you realize, oh, no, it's actually because he doesn't want it to escape into the ship because he wants to capture it. Because, again, that's the whole reason they're here. It's these little things like this and the way Ian Holm plays it and really sells it. And then finally when he turns and he becomes very menacing, and you see, like when he takes the magazine and he tries to shove it down Ripley's throat and all that. It's harrowing stuff, and that's probably the toughest scene to watch in the whole movie. And Ian Holm goes, clearly across this spectrum of just nice guy that's part of the crew, and then all of a sudden this evil android, representative of Mother on the board or on the ship. and that journey that we take and see that is fantastic. And I think that maybe the when you compare the two, I think that may be the biggest highlight of the two, and the best, which is why I saved it for last. The best reason why Alien is better, and it's especially interesting when you realize that, and we might have even discussed this in season one, but um, Ash was not a character in the original script, if I remember correctly. That it was something that Ridley Scott wanted to add, and Dan O'Bannon who wrote the script was very much against it, and did not want to do it, and thought the whole android angle was stupid. And I think he's even now come out and said, Dan O'Bannon has, that clearly he was wrong and it was the right choice, but he was against it at the time. So, but I think Ash as a character and as the token synthetic for that movie, I think just adds that little element, especially with Ian Holm giving as good a performance as he has. That's the final piece that I think really puts Alien over the edge, and gives it the edge over Aliens, in my opinion.
Okay, all great points. Eve, whenever you are ready, you can respond to any of Jeff's statements or just kind of start in on your own arguments, whatever you'd like. The floor is yours.
I'll just start. So I think the number one, well, not the number one, but the first point for why you should pick Aliens, is the Marines. This ragtag group of hard asses, they set the standard for badass machismo in the 1980s. I mean, obviously, there's a whole bunch of different movies from the 80s that have guys like this, and gals, but these guys and gals are so much fun in this movie. You got Hicks, and his whiny butt. Michael Bean's character, who winds up, being the leader after everybody gets killed. The sergeant, who just has one-liner after one-liner, who's just awesome. Vasquez and her talking shit to the other guys. It's a fun group to hang around. And while the crew in Alien is, it's enjoyable as well, seeing them all play off each other, there's just a level of camaraderie and grab assing going on that it is fun to watch in Aliens. And then when the shit hits the fan, it's interesting to see them. These are highly skilled, proficient warriors, and to see them start to realize that, oh shit, we're up against something that we can't handle here. It just makes it all the more terrifying. Because for as competent and as skilled as the crew were of the Nostromo, they're still just like long haul space freighters. And so, you don't expect them to be able to put up a fight, even though they do an admirable job. But these hardcore trained killers who have been all across the galaxy, when they start falling one by one, you're like, oh man, it's the perfect killing machine. It really ups the stakes. So not only are they fun, but it's a way to show how dangerous the aliens are in Aliens. So that's number one, the Marines.
I think that's a good point. I do love the sort of back and forth, and it's something that James Cameron will use further in his career, specifically in the Avatar movies. But the always love the line, hey Vasquez, have you ever been confused for a man? No, have you? Like that was pretty good. And you don't even
so good lines.
You bring up the Marines, and you don't even bring up the funnest fact of them all for this, that Bill Paxton is the one actor who has been killed by an alien, a predator, and a Terminator. So that's
game over, man. Game over.
Game over, man. That's a fun fact. The only thing I will say to rebut is can't argue with anything about how cool the Marines are and how fun that dynamic is. But there is still a good dynamic in at the crew of the Nostromo, specifically when we have, even though he's the first to die, the legendary Harry Dean Stanton. Which, I mean, how can you argue with that? But and it's him and I can't remember the name, the Yaphet Kotto. I can't remember his character's name. But they, they're sort of bickering about their shares and all that sort of stuff. So there's a little bit, even if it's not to the extent of the Marines and Aliens, there is still some fun factor there for the first one.
All right, number 2, the character of Newt. You know, I don't have kids, but I can recognize from a storytelling perspective how giving a human child for the main character to look after, main characters, certainly ups the stakes, and it does. It gives this a more. There's more at stake. Literally, you have a child's life that they have to guard, and it just makes everything a bit more treacherous, a bit more poignant. Newt also is a pretty good child actor, or the actress who plays Newt. You really kind of feel that she's gone semi-feral after living in these ducks for, we think, weeks, right? I mean, it's been a long time, because at one point, one of the characters says, one of the Marines says something about how long they have to wait for a distress call, or I think it's like 7 days or something like that. It's multiple days before a rescue comes if they're not heard from. And Ripley says, she survived here for longer than that by herself. So I think it's at least a week, and you can really see it on her face and in her mannerisms. And I think it's just a really good acting performance, but it also gives Ripley something to care about a little bit more. She had Jonesy in the first one, like you mentioned, but as much as I love cats and as much as I don't want children, I understand that most people are going to say the stakes are higher with a human child than a cat. So, plus it's fine. We know Jonesy's safely tucked away back on Earth. So the character of Newt is number 2. The Marines and Newt are what we got so far.
Newt is good, and as we see Steve's cat in the background, he heard you, Steve. He heard you talking that. He's like, Jonesy, he's got to stand up for his boy.
That's not even my cat. That's Peaches. That's the neighborhood cat who's just decided to come inside.
Gotcha.
Michelle let him
in. But the Newt is a good character. The only thing I will say to try and rebut it is that, just as you said, it's raising the stakes, and one could argue that the only real reason they put Newt in there is to raise the stakes, because it's like, well, we did a cat the first time, so now we got to actually have a human to care for this time, because we already raised the stakes with the xenomorphs. Nobody's gonna believe that she would risk going back into this settlement to get a cat like she did in the first one. So we got to do something else. I don't know if that was the logic, but one could make that argument. And for the purposes of this show, I'm making that argument right now.
All right, the third one is, it's simply that the first Alien, I love. It's one of my favorite movies. And it is a fantastic horror movie and a psychological, suspense thriller. And traditionally, most people think, I thought as well, Aliens, it's an action movie, like we kind of talked about. Obviously, like you said, they have elements of each in both of them, but I've always thought of Aliens as first and foremost an action movie. But as I rewatched it, as I kind of mentioned in my rebuttal with you, I think it should win, beside the points we already said, because it does horror and action at an elite level. And I never really noticed how much of a suspenseful slow burn it is. Like I said, I kind of talked about this in rebuttal 20 years, but a really long time goes by before we actually see what we're dealing with. We know as viewers what's out there, but the characters don't. And I think that really comes across. You see it in how uh, confident the Marines are at first. At Carter, his willingness to take risks to get this thing back for the company. We're projecting what we know about what's out there based on the first movie, but the characters don't know that, and I think it really, you can feel it. And this is what finally sold me on it, this argument. The movie uses action movie tropes to enhance the horror. So the craziest, most awesome example of this is they set up the auto turret guns down in the hallway, right? It'd be real easy to show those things just blasting away, killing aliens, heads exploding, corpses going everywhere, but they don't do that. Most of the sequence where those auto turrets are in action, you see it from the perspective of the Marines and stuff waiting. And these are remote turrets. So all they're seeing is the ammo count drop, so they know they're firing at something, and they know they're firing at a lot of somethings. And then, the tension is just ratcheting up as that ammo count drops all the way down to 0. And eventually all 4 of these turrets run dry, and you never see a single alien shot in that whole sequence. And there's a couple shots of the guns actually firing, but I just thought that was really, really cool how the action is being shown off screen, but the terror is increasing because we're watching a machine gun fire, which normally you wouldn't think of being a very suspenseful thing. That's going to be pure action, right? But I don't know. That sequence alone sold me that I think maybe even I believe this argument that Aliens deserves to win over Alien, despite me loving Alien so much. It's just this masterful way that they were able to fuse the two genres, action and horror, together. So, yeah, there you go. So the Marines, Newt, and the fusion of the action and horror genres is just magnifique. I thought about, as an honorable mention, the loader fight at the end against the Queen, because that's just fucking awesome. Ripley's in the big steel loader and she's battling this giant queen, but in a way that's kind of a just souped up version of the final battle to Xenomorph in the first one. So I didn't want to rest my whole argument on it, but it's worth bringing up. That's an iconic shot, and we know how much the judge likes iconography and how much things are lasting in pop culture. So Ripley in the loader there with the yellow bars in front of her face and stuff, and the alien growling out of the Queen. That's pretty fucking iconic. Anyway, I rest my case.
So something that's interesting here is, I'll save that for my closing argument. But I do agree there are some horror elements. My favorite scene from Aliens is they're when we first kind of catch a glimpse of one of the xenomorphs, they're tracking down a hallway or some sort of cavern or something, and all the caverns are dark, and I think it's Vasquez crosses in front of the camera, and the camera kind of lingers for a second, and then we see the shadows move, and it's one of the xenomorphs crawling on the ceiling or something, and it's that's creepy. That's some creepy stuff right there. And so I do agree that Aliens does have a good, does do a good job of incorporating some horror into it, even though it's more on the action side. But I think the tension, not only the horror, but then the ability to ratchet up the tension that the first one has, I think still eclipses it. Especially, when you talk about the end scene where, Ripley, she's stripped down to her underwear to try and or to get into the pod so she can go into cryo sleep, and then she's got to slowly maneuver herself into the spacesuit because she knows she's going to push it out the airlock and all that. That is, you want to talk about iconic. There's a very iconic, very, tense, very stressful scene that is as good as any I think, in film history, let alone, for this franchise. So, the one thing that Alien, I don't want to say the word lacks, even though I just said it, but the one major thing is that the Alien doesn't have as much action, hardly any, in comparison to Aliens, but that's that is a choice. So it's hard to kind of, for me, to hold it against Alien when that's just not something that they're going for.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think ultimately, well, I guess I'm giving my final thing. We should let Jeff go first. Not to step on your toes there, Judge.
Yeah, I
Actually,
guess I
I have
could.
a
Oh, go
question for
ahead.
both of you before you go into final arguments. Deciding if I want to go there. I do. I think I want to go there.
Go there. That's what this
I'm gonna
podcast
go
is
there.
for.
It is what this podcast is for. Steve, I'll kick this one to you first, just because that way we kind of flip flop it. Then for the arguments, I found it interesting that neither of you mentioned. Not. I don't mean that in an insulting way. You just didn't happen to mention that these movies have been widely interpreted for um, how gender roles are assessed, and certainly looking at the character of Ripley as some see as almost a feminist icon of cinema. Um, Obviously, you kind of see her as more of a final girl in Alien, and then there's taking on more of a kind of this motherly role to Newt in Aliens, and that also kind of contrasts a little bit with the machoism of all the soldier guys. I'd like to hear from your perspectives on kind of the gender politics of these movies, and if you think that adds anything to your arguments, or what you might think. And Steve, just because I'll flip flop it here, I'll go ahead and go to you first, and then we'll do final arguments.
Yeah, it's obviously it was an early depiction of a super strong female character in this setting, right? And she's God, Sigourney Weaver is just the perfect actress for this, isn't she? She kills it. And in the first one, it's more they're not taking her as serious as they should, as they probably would have if she was a man, especially when she tries to follow protocol and keep the unknown organism off. But one thing I found interesting, not interesting, but that I like about the second one is people do listen to her. Like, she proves her worth, which she shouldn't have to, but she does. And the Hudson character, Michael Bean's soldier, I mean, he buys in. He's buying what she's selling, man. Especially when she points out that after the lieutenant's dead and that the sergeant's dead, and it's like that he is the ranking member. And oh God, what's the line where she says, I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be.
Leave the planet and nuke it from orbit.
Yeah. And Burke's like, wait, we can't do this. And Ripley's like, basically, fuck. She says they can bill me after he says it's
That's the best part. They could, yeah.
And then,
and with such perfect inflection and tone, she says it as well.
Yes. And then finally, when they realize that, it's Hicks. I keep confusing. Why did the screenwriters do Hicks and Hudson for two soldiers? They should have had different last names, much more different last names. But anyway, Hicks, the Michael Biehn character, when he, realizes that he does have the authority now, he's like, I say we take off, nuke the site from orbit. And there's a pause as he looks at her and says, it's the only way to be sure. And so maybe this is just me wanting a more happy ending on the gender norms front, but that's some good positive feedback for Ripley. She's been recognized as being competent, whereas there's no one left alive to give her any sort of recognition in the first one. In fact, that's a plot point in the second one. She's actually busted down and put in corporate jail, sort of, by the company because they don't really believe her story at the beginning of the movie, from the first movie. It's a really awkward way of saying that, but you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah. Does that answer your question? I think it's awesome in both movies, but it's kind of nice to see some validation. Not that she needs it,
Yeah, I mean,
but
yeah,
it's nice to
there's
see it in
no.
the cycle.
I'll let Jeff speak. Yeah, there's no right answer to this question. I just kind of want to hear you both comment on it, just because I think it's a big part of both the film's legacy. So, Jeff, I'll let you speak to that as well.
Yeah, so kind of famously, the original script for Alien was not written with any gendered roles. All the characters, that's why they all have these sort of generic last names that they go by, because there was never any intention to have one be specifically male or female, and it was just a decision to be made in casting. But it does say a lot specifically for Alien that at the time they cast Sigourney Weaver to be that role, knowing that she would be the survivor. Obviously, they didn't know about the franchise and how it would go forward from there. Um, and it's kind of interesting too because there wasn't really. I guess it's hard for me to say because I wasn't alive, but there's n- I don't believe that there was really as much of a final girl trope at the time because I mean we had shit, I cannot remember her name, but the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Christy, I think her name was, and that was in '74, and then you had Laurie Strode from Halloween in '78. And by the time Halloween came out, they were probably already in production on this. So the idea, this whole the whole final girl thing. So the only reason I say that is because uh, in conjunction with how the script was written, it wasn't something where it was like, oh, we need to get Sigourney Weaver because she's got to be the final girl. That wasn't the way they did it. They got Sigourney Weaver because they believed she was best for the role and fit the role the best. And I mean, is there a more perfect casting choice in history? I could rack my brain and I could maybe think of somebody that might do well in that role. It's one of those situations where you might be able to find somebody who could play that role as well as her, maybe, but nobody's going to be Ripley better than Sigourney Weaver was. And so I think that it was a specific choice. It was something that they recognized in the process that she would be perfect for this role. And I don't know that they necessarily did it thinking that, okay, we're going to create a feminist icon here, or we're doing this because she's a woman and we want the final survivor to be a woman. But I think the fact that they could have made any choice and they chose her just because she was best for the role. I think that says a lot about Sigourney Weaver. I think it says a lot about the filmmakers, and I think it says a lot, to your point, Nate, about the sort of feminist icon factor that because that's ultimately what feminism wants, right? Not to do something because it's a woman or to have the role because it's a woman, but just because when you can pick a woman or a man, if the woman is best, that's what they pick, and that's what happened. And that's even before the movie even got filmed and got started. That was the decision that they made. So when you look back at that and you think to where we are now, which is still dealing with misogyny and sexism both in the world and in Hollywood, the fact that that was made nearly 50 years ago is something really impressive, and I think reflects very highly on everyone involved with the film and with both films, really, with how they characterize the Ripley character.
Well, it's not just Ripley too, because as you were saying that, I got to thinking in Alien, you got Lambert, who is a highly skilled, competent. She's an officer. She's a
Yep.
navigator. And there's no
Well,
no
in
question
Aliens,
of whether she can do it or anything.
And in Aliens, you have Vasquez,
Yeah.
who is
This is
easily
the
the
80s.
best.
Like women weren't allowed in combat roles in our military until
Yeah,
20 years after this.
yeah, and I mean, the best. She's clearly the best Marine, maybe with the exception of Hicks. But when
Yeah.
you juxtapose her with the Bill Paxton character, I'm blanking on his name at this second, but
Hudson.
Hudson, thank you. When you compare her with Hudson, and he sort of acts the tough game, but then shrinks the minute he gets adversity, but she's plugging away up until her death. Again, I agree. That's just another aspect of how this, and I think that's why a franchise like this can live as long as it did, because it, and you brought this up in one of your points, Steve, about how using tropes to their advantage as opposed to just using the tropes because they didn't have any other answer. Like it takes a smart filmmaker to do that. Ridley Scott, James Cameron, both are very smart filmmakers and both use that to their advantage.
Would you say that they're both greats?
Ah!
Oh, with that teen up of that of that, we will proceed to final arguments. And I know I kind of flip flopped it. So, Jeff, with the original film, you will go ahead and start us off whenever you are ready.
So I'll say something just sort of effusive about both these movies, which is to say that as we go through this season, it's been kind of interesting. You've got your, for lack of a better term, your sort of rehash sequel, where it's just it takes the first one and it sort of rehashes the plot, adds maybe a few elements, but then ups the ante. We talked about Home Alone recently. That's essentially what Home Alone 2 was. Sister Act 2, Father of the Bride, etc. That's essentially what those types of sequels are doing, versus sequels that go in an entirely different direction, where you have like, or not necessarily different direction, but can definitely carve out its own niche, right? Your Godfather 2s, your Terminator 2s, etc. Empire Strikes Back, another one. Well, it's kind of interesting that Aliens is the first one to essentially do both. It kind of rehashes what the first one did, but it raises the stakes, and as opposed to something like, like we talked about with Home Alone, where the stakes get raised. This feels like I'm talking more for Aliens than Alien, but just
I was going to say, I'm not going to give a closing. I'm just going to rest. I like what he's saying.
I just started riffing on there, but it is impressive just as a pair, that the movies can be similar but different. They can exist as a pair, but they can exist very much on their own, and that's something special that is pretty rare. We talked about it with Godfather and Terminator, but even something like Empire Strikes Back, it's as good as that movie is, and it's very much the middle part of a trilogy. So anyway, but back to the point. Final arguments. Why is Alien better? And I think when you look at the essence of each movie and what makes them great, I think the pieces that make Alien great are just a little bit better than Aliens. When you talk about, because in Aliens, you've got Lance Henriksen as the synthetic, and you've got sort of Paul Reiser as the villain, and they both do a good job for those roles. I love Paul Reiser, so I'm glad you didn't mention him as part of your argument. But then in the first one, Ian Holm has to take on both those roles, and he has to do both of them sort of under the radar, because you not only do you not know that he's the villain, but you don't know that he's an android for a good portion of the movie as well. So it's that being sort of the key piece, I think, and Holmes' performance as it sort of bounces off the other characters, I think just really gives it a notch above. I think the way that they build the tension both before the xenomorph really gets going, and then sort of in that final sequence as the self-destruct is going, and she's carrying Jonesy, and she's carrying all the keys and doing all the pulling up the pods, whatever the hell they're called, to get the self-destruct. And then we get the exhale as she's getting ready to tuck herself into the cryo chamber, and then we get that final, oh god, the xenomorph's there, but it's hurt. Does it see her? What's going on? And she, slowly gets into the suit, and the whole in space, no one can hear you scream. Like, that's the sequence that they were talking about when they make that tagline, and that that whole sequence, that whole time is just it's so iconic and it's so great. And even though I think there's a ton of things that Aliens does very well, I think when you just have those sort of those when you break it down to the components and you look at what they do and you compare them to the sort of other components of Aliens, I think Alien just gets a couple notches in a couple key areas, that puts it above, in my opinion.
I think my esteemed counselor said it best. He's like, most of these sequels that we've looked at, sometimes they struggle to either do something totally new or just rehash the first one with some minor variations. And Aliens is the rare one that does both. And I think that is kind of best exemplified by my point three, what I was talking about, the mixture of horror and action. It's really two genres mixed and entwined in one. And it does it at such a high level. And as a sequel, it's playing with what we know from the first one. And obviously that's not a point you can really hold for it directly against the original, just because the original didn't have the opportunity to do that. But it's just masterful filmmaking. I think maybe the only thing that Alien truly does better, aside from just being a pure psychological horror film, which Aliens isn't, is the android character. So I'll give Jeff that. But the Bishop character in Aliens, the is he evil? Question mark. That is exploited and played upon because of the knowledge we have of Ash in the first one. I think it really works. And then his kind of heroic turn and saving Ripley there before sacrificing himself, well, inadvertently, it makes it all the more poignant. But that's not really a closing argument. I guess I'm getting off the path here. It's really just Aliens does everything Alien does and just goes the extra mile and does everything a little bit better, I think. To me, like I said, when I first sat down to watch these, I was like, I don't really know. I've always kind of always been partial to war movies, as you guys know, and military stuff. And so I guess by default, I've always kind of liked Aliens better. But the last few years, the more and more I've watched Alien, I'm like, that thing's just perfect. It's perfect. But rewatching it this time, rewatching Aliens this time, I was like, this thing is hitting the same highs on a horror level and a suspense level. And then it's also got fucking sweet machine guns. So it's just the perfect combination of those things that puts it above Alien. Alien is doing what it's doing at an incredibly high level. Aliens is doing a little bit more.
Oh shit. Okay. So
You were probably hoping that we would keep talking so you wouldn't have to make a decision, because this is tough.
yeah, this is just it's one of those weeks. So this is an interesting thing for me because I'll be completely transparent. I have a preference, and I had a preference coming into the week. When I've watched both of the movies as a judge, I typically don't rewatch them the week before, so I did not rewatch these movies. So I am going to rely a little bit, as we should. I'm going to lean pretty heavily on the arguments tonight, and even that was hard because I think ultimately you both ended up making really good arguments. With that said, and I'll give you my reasoning. I'm actually going to go with Aliens. James Cameron's Aliens sequel. I particularly, Steve, really something that I'd never even really thought. And again, I've seen the movie, and I had never really. I love the point that you made about using action movie tropes to build suspense. I
didn't
think
even really appreciated it until this rewatch.
I absolutely think you're right, and I also, and again, having not rewatched, I watched Alien, a couple years ago when we did the first episode. I've probably seen Aliens since like around Halloween, just whenever I've seen it on TV. I also wasn't really aware of. I kind of want to go back and watch it now of just sort of the slow burn of it, because I do kind of think of Alien as more of the slower burn, and I'm sure that it is. But I wasn't really aware that you don't see any of the xenomorphs for quite that long in the runtime for Aliens. So, with that said, I still think that my personal preference is probably Alien, but I think that Steve made some very compelling arguments. And honestly, Jeff has just been beating the shit out of us this season. So, I
Oh,
so
bias.
not that I'm trying to weigh the numbers, because I really do. I appreciated honestly a lot of the arguments Jeff made as well. But I really, Steve, I really liked what you said about using action movie tropes to build suspense and thinking
So
about that sequence with the machine guns. That I never
It
really
was
thought through
it was
that.
really cool when I had that realization this time watching it.
Yeah.
so it was part of what was so tough about this, making the arguments for these. My first argument in my head for why is Alien better um, was gonna be the pacing, because it's a perfectly paced movie for the movie that it's trying to be. But then you watch Aliens and you're like, fuck, this is perfectly paced as well. So I was like, I can't use this because then Steve could just be like, well, whatever he said, but add an
Same.
S to the end. So that's, I mean, here's an interesting thought though. Okay, so you look at these two movies, two directors, Ridley Scott, James Cameron. So both these movies are hits in terms of like hits or misses, not necessarily box office hits, just in terms of whether or not they're good, well-made films. Um, Now you look at James Cameron and you look at his career, and you could make the argument with James Cameron that he just does not miss. I mean,
Yeah.
has he made a bad movie? Like every one of
incredible.
his movies is good. And we've discussed a bunch already. Ridley Scott, he does miss, and he misses a lot because he swings for the fences every time, but he also has a lot of hits. So
I'd also say
if
Ridley Scott is more prolific. Like Ridley Scott has made a lot
yes,
more
absolutely.
movies. So
Yeah, he's made
there's more
2 or
room
3
for
times
him, I
as many
think, to
movies.
miss. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, James Cameron he won the Oscar for Titanic, and then he didn't make another movie for 12 years. So yeah,
Yeah.
he's
And
only
then
made
did
like
it
12
again. Well,
movies,
not the
13.
Oscar, but he did it again with Avatar and Avatar
That's
2.
true. Yeah, it was 14 years for that one. And so I haven't seen Avatar 3, but I do plan to. But I bring that up because I'm kind of curious what, like, would you, if we're to keep the Duel of the Greats theme, to go back to the first 2 seasons, obviously we don't have to hash it out entirely, but I mean, which side would you land on in terms of Ridley Scott versus James Cameron over who's the better director?
It's a great comparison, and it's honestly that's a really inspired question. Shit.
1, 2, 3, 4, 6,
I
7.
mean, I'd have to count up. I'd have to like spend some time.
James Cameron's has only made 10 feature films.
Yeah,
That's
One of them was
crazy.
Piranha 2, so that didn't even really count.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
literally everything since then.
Because let's
has
see,
been
let's see if I can
incredible.
name them all. He's got Terminator 1, Terminator 2, the 3 Avatar movies, True Lies, Titanic. I'm missing 2 of them here. What am I missing?
You're gonna really
Aliens,
kick
of course.
yourself for one
Aliens,
of them.
of
There
course,
you go.
yeah. So that's 8, but I'm missing 1 here. What's the other one?
It's one that
What am
I
I
don't
missing?
think you've seen, but you need to see. The
What is it?
Abyss.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I do need to see
Yeah.
that.
Which
is
that's a
also
good movie.
That's the only one
Yeah.
I haven't seen. True Lies, I love. I mean, James Cameron, like, True Lies is just a straight comedy, and it's hilarious, and it also works as an action movie. And
Man, my
like,
gut is James Cameron.
I don't think Ridley Scott could make. I mean, my gut says Ridley Scott because he makes more interesting movies, but I don't think Ridley Scott could make a movie. Like, I think James Cameron could probably make Alien, but I don't know that Ridley Scott could make Aliens. Maybe that's not fair, but
I definitely think James Cameron, God damn it, James Cameron could make Alien because he did many parts of it in Aliens. Now,
And I
obviously,
don't
he
think
had the road.
I don't think Ridley Scott could make True Lies. 100% don't think that. But
You don't think The Counselor stacks up with True Lies?
But then
I
again,
will say about
I say that, and then I do think Ridley Scott could make Titanic. So
I think so. I probably lean James Cameron as well. Something as I'm just sort of looking through the filmography. This is a weird thing. It like if you have to break a tie, this is a weird way to break a tie, and it to me, I'd almost go to like something that neither of them does particularly well, but who does the thing that they're not necessarily known for. Mentioning True Lies, even like there's elements of this in Terminator 2, certainly. There's even some elements of this in Titanic. Cameron occasionally has I think, a better ear for injecting a little bit of humor and comedy into his movies. Ridley
I'd agree with that.
Scott doesn't really do that. There's all the, Terminator 2 shooting the guy and be like, he'll live. And True Lies, of course, the whole movie is hysterical.
Tom Arnold is amazing in that movie. God, I love that
I completely agree that Ridley Scott could absolutely not make True Lies. There's even like in like a line I forget about, like in Titanic, like when Leo's in the water freezing to death, he goes, "I don't know about you, but the White Star Line is getting a very strongly worded letter about all this." Like that, like even that, like to kind of inject even a moment like that with some kind of humor. I think Cameron, in terms of kind of having a blockbuster feel, because you kind of need that a little bit. I think he certainly has that. I agree that I think Ridley Scott certainly makes more interesting films. I mean, Alien and Blade Runner and Kingdom of Heaven, even Matchstick Men. Like I think those are probably
Thelma
more
and
interesting
Louise.
films. Yeah, Thelma and Louise. I mean,
definitely.
so
Because that might be one that I don't know if James Cameron could make, Thelma and Louise.
Yeah,
Maybe, but it's interesting though because we talk about the sort of feminist legacy of both these movies, and that's actually a through line in James Cameron's career, right? If you want to talk about Sarah Connor, you want to talk about Ripley from Aliens, even Jamie Lee Curtis's character in True Lies, who starts off as just, your typical nagging wife or whatever, she ends up saving the day in the end, or helping to save the day in the end. The Neytiri character in the Avatar movies is very much your strong character type, whereas we talked about it in season 1. Outside of Alien, what does Ridley Scott have in terms of sort of empowered female characters in his filmography?
Thelma and Louise.
Thelma and Louise,
Thelma and
yes,
Louise.
but like it's definitely to a lesser extent than what Cameron has, I would say. And you could even you could even argue in Titanic, even though the Kate Winslet character, sort of product of her time, sort of expected to be seen and not heard by the men of that era, she still takes her own agency and makes her own decisions, and something that you very easily could make that movie and not have made that character that way. So I'm not necessarily, this is sort of talking through it as I think about it, but it's interesting as I think about it now. When you brought up that feminism angle, that's something that has definitely been more common in James Cameron's career than Ridley Scott's, even though
I
again
think you're selling Ridley Scott short.
But I mean, we talked about it in the first season as an issue, in both Spielberg and Ridley Scott, how they represented
we talked about it as
inconsistently, I'll at least say.
It was definitely more of an issue with I mean, I remember it being a bigger
Definitely way more of an
with-
issue with Spielberg, 100%.
with Spielberg. I don't know. I will tell you what's very interesting if you'd like to know the listeners' poll here. For this
Yes, I
evening.
would.
So
Did
it's
we get it
interesting
right,
that
or did we
on
get it wrong?
well, we'll just wait. So on TikTok, it's a dead tie. 50% to 50%.
Oh my
Now
god.
I think I only got like, it must have had to have been even like 30 votes or something. So it had to have been like 15 to 15. Instagram did lean toward Alien, 59% to 41%.
Instagram is a smarter bunch of people, I've always said.
Instagram, I will say Instagram also the other weird thing, and I don't know, maybe there is a way. I can't figure out like the polling numbers. I can put the poll into the field, but then it doesn't show me like how many people have voted for each movie. So I'm not sure how many people voted there. But it did lean a little bit more toward Alien. But I think generally, I think it was probably pretty even. This is a tough one. I can,
I think so. Set aside our question of what is the better sequel, in this whole season. Is there a better 1-2 punch this entire season than these two? I submit to you that no. I think Alien is on a much higher plane than Terminator, and Aliens and T2 are pretty damn close. So I think the cumulative, total
I would agree with that.
power. Yeah. I mean, these two movies are just so good.
The Godfather is the only one that I would maybe put forward. I think in terms of like pure entertainment media, Alien probably is a better one. I completely agree that OG Alien is a far superior film to the OG Terminator. I'll get with you on that. I would say T2 is better than Aliens, probably not to the extent that of the originals, the range there, but I think that, I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, yes. The answer to your question, it might be the best, just pure 1-2 punch of like entertainment. Yes, that we've seen so far.
Which leads us into the next question of, is Terminator 2 dethroned as the best sequel? Again, doesn't mean that it's the best movie, but is it the best sequel?
Here's
That's
the
a
reason I
tough
still
one.
it's
I hadn't
tough.
even
I
thought
still
about
say
it.
no. I still say no. I did think about this question a little bit this week because I was thinking about these movies. I still say no, and this is just, I think we all grade this maybe a little bit differently. These are both really, really good films, but I think that Alien, if they had never made any more Alien films, Alien would still be a standalone masterpiece. Terminator, for me, and I think I've made this point a few times, Terminator 2 is so good that it actually, for me, retroactively elevates the first Terminator. It actually makes the first Terminator a better movie. And for me, Aliens, as great as it is, it doesn't do that for Alien. It doesn't retroactively make Alien better. Whereas, I go back and the only reason I go back and watch the original, the only reason I go back and watch the original Terminator is because T2 exists, and I would watch them like back to back as like a complementary piece, Whereas Alien and Aliens, I can kind of, I really, in some ways, I sort of enjoy them as very two separate pieces of media. So in the spirit of what a sequel is, I still pick Terminator 2.
I think that's the right answer.
Yeah.
Based on what you said. And also, I think it's just it's such a leap from the first one. The gap between the two. Not that Terminator's bad. I argued for it. But, a sequel has to really do something better. And Aliens, as we've shown, is not that much better than Alien, if it is at all. So
yeah, and
I mean, I will say
production value, like the sets and stuff are bigger in Aliens, but in terms of the quality of the production, I don't really. There's not really a huge gap, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, I agree.
I will say though, like to that question that we ask every week, this is probably as close as it's ever been.
Even
Godfather to dethroning 2, Terminator 2, you mean?
Terminator 2, because Terminator 2 dethroned Godfather 2, and then since Terminator 2, this is the closest it's been where it's just like, So,
I very much entertained the thought that
this is the closest I've had, which is funny because they're both James Cameron.
Dude, he's good. He's a good director.
And as I said it, we mentioned Avatar. We could have. We totally missed the boat on this one. Spoiler alert: Avatar is not in the season, and we could have been very topical by putting all the Avatar movies together.
Man,
That would
we
be an
just need to
interesting discussion.
go.
I've discovered recently that I'm an Avatar guy. You know, I always kind of
Yeah,
liked it, but I
you
got more excited about the third one. I realized I'm kind of an Avatar guy. I like it. I like the stuff.
I think if we all would have just gone down to the bottom of the ocean in a submersible and died, James Cameron would have been interested in us and talked about
That's
us.
true.
I bet he would have.
That's true.
I bet he would have listened to the podcast.
He probably would have.
Huge,
Funny
huge
story
miss there.
as we talk about Avatar and James Cameron and Sigourney Weaver. So James Cameron is notoriously a gigantic asshole on set. Like a tyrant. Like it's just a very difficult person to work with. From obviously it works. The proof is in the pudding there. But it's funny because I heard a story in an interview with Sigourney Weaver when she was asked to play the character that she plays in Avatar, the first one, and she was asked by James Cameron, and she said she would only play the character if she could base the character on James Cameron. To which he agreed.
One of the
So-
all-time great Golden Globe opening monologue jokes. It was Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, and it was the year Zero Dark 30, directed by Catherine Bigelow, was nominated for Best Picture. They said, and one of them was like, I haven't seen it, but I'll take the word on torture from any woman who is married to James Cameron. And I got a very big laugh in the crowd.
It
Apparently
seems like he has a sense of humor about it. Hopefully,
he has some self-awareness about it, but it's one of those things where he's so cocky that he's just like, yeah, I'm an asshole, but look what it's got me, so and it's hard to argue, because I remember when I also read a story, and this was from an interview with James Cameron, where he was trying to get Avatar greenlit, and the studio was like, I don't know about this, and he essentially was just like, this building that we're in, I built by making Titanic. So you're gonna make this movie, and I'm gonna make this movie, and you're gonna pay for it. And they did, and they made $2 billion.
Yeah, I was gonna say he wasn't wrong. I mean, yeah.
he clearly he knows what the people want.
Well, speaking of knowing what the people want, we have a very exciting week next week. We are going to do, and I'm excited to talk about this because it's when I say this, maybe right off the bat, people aren't going to think like, "What? One's clearly more superior than the other," and I'm going to maybe prove that wrong next week. We're going to talk about Batman Begins versus The Dark Knight, the first two entries in the Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Pretty widely regarded as a total reinvention of the Batman character, two of the best superhero comic book movies ever made. So we're going to do that. But until then, you can hit us up on the socials. We are at Duel of the Greats everywhere, except for TikTok, where we are at Duel Podcast. You can send us an email, duelofthegreats@gmail.com. We have another sequel that's won. I believe is that now 6-5 for the originals? That we're at?
Sequels are making a comeback.
I was going to say, with just a few weeks left, so it's going to get very interesting. Yeah, so tune in next week as we are talking Batman and getting into some Christopher Nolan movies, which we haven't really done before. Obviously, a pretty big filmmaker, and we've never really discussed him at length on our podcast. So that'll be fun. That'll be fun to get into. I was thinking about that today as well. So next week, Batman Begins versus The Dark Knight. This is Duel of the Greats. Thank you for listening.